I am Dracula.
Who was flickering the lights?
I'm cool, sexy Dracula. His name, Alucard. Nosferatu.
Welcome back, everybody, to a video. Dracula, that's what we're talking about today. I wanted to rank all of the bestest Dracula movies in celebration of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. Let's talk about all the Draculas and which ones were my favorites. Now, this isn't every single Dracula movie that's ever been made because there's like a billion Dracula movies, but I feel like I've seen a good range of them and many from different eras, so I feel like this is a pretty good selection. But what Dracula movies did I miss? What other ones should I watch? Let me know in the comments. Honorable mention for one that I wanted to see but didn't get to was Blackula, the black exploitation 70s Dracula movie that apparently is actually kind of not bad. So anyways, I'm a big fan of vampires. I really like Buffy. I really like Blade. And so I've really wanted to get into Dracula for a long time. And I have seen a good amount. And then this last couple of years, I've tried to watch a few extra Draculas because I was preparing for Nosferatu, which I was very, very excited for. I've loved pretty much everything Robert Eggers has made so far, and we'll get into this new one. But let's get into ranking stuff, starting with Bram Stoker's Dracula, the book from, I had the years written down somewhere, 1987. That's later than I thought it was. So Dracula, the book, I read that this year. I did the audiobook. Like I know that I have to kind of think of it in the time that it was created, and it was pretty innovative in terms of vampire stories and kind of set the standard for the genre. But honestly, and this is probably going to make people mad, I'm going to go B tier on Dracula, the book. Mostly, well, for two reasons. One, I think I don't like the story of Dracula that much, which is obviously a problem for me making this list because I really want to, because Dracula is like the golden standard of vampire mythology and everything, and like that's I love that. I think that's great. I love vampires. I think they're cool, but I don't think I like the story of Dracula that much. This book for me was just way too long. Like it had some good stuff in it for sure. I really liked when Van Helsing showed up. I thought the opening was really strong when Jonathan Harker's in Dracula's castle and he's like trying to figure out why this guy is so fucking weird. But it takes a long time for stuff to really start happening in this book. The audiobook was like 19 hours. That's almost as long as the Dune audiobook for reference. It's like there's no reason for it to be that long, because like at the end of the day, the main Dracula story is like this guy is trying to buy a house in London. He comes to London, he kills one lady, and then he almost kills a second, and then they stop him, and that's the whole story. And for some reason that took 19 hours to tell. That's too long. Sorry. I understand it's an old book. You know, I thought the characters were solid. The structure of the book is fine. It's just like really not a whole lot happens, and it's very long. And a lot of it is like we, the audience, and I think part of the problem for me was just that like Dracula is such a famous story and famous thing that like I know everything about what's going to happen in this book before reading it, just from seeing other movies and just other pop culture in general, which means that like the characters slowly uncovering that Dracula is a vampire like takes fucking forever, and it feels like it takes even longer because like me, as a reader in 2024, knows everything about Dracula already, where the characters are, just coming across this thing for the first time. It takes a lot of time before like people are actually convinced that stuff is happening. I don't know. I could appreciate it for what it's worth and for the time it was written, which it was obviously very innovative at the time. And I do like a lot of the stuff in it. I like Van Helsing as a character. I think Dracula was a cool and scary villain when he was actually there, which is actually a very small portion of the book. And I liked Mina, who's one of the main leads, and she has a lot of strength as a protagonist that I thought was really interesting. How she kind of holds this group of what becomes our main group of vampire hunters together. But like, damn, is it fucking so long. And as we will see in some of the later movie versions of the story, you could condense that shit. You could trim it way down. Okay, next up, Nosferatu, Symphony of Horror, 1922 version. This is the original black and white, silent era, German expressionist period film by F.W. Murnau. Yeah, F.W. Murnau. Again, you kind of have to like think of it for the time it was created. Is it super duper scary nowadays? Not so much. But it has some of the most iconic imagery in any horror movie, maybe ever. Excellent stuff with like shadows. They do a lot of like really interesting things where they shot like on location for a whole bunch of the scenes in this movie, which wasn't really done during this period. This is part of the German expressionist period in the silent era of film history. Learned a lot about it in film history class, but I kind of find it more interesting nowadays. See, Germany had their Great Depression a decade earlier in the 20s, while the rest of the Western world, especially the United States, was having their roaring 20s. Financially, everything was hunky-dory. Germany was having a real shit time after having to take the entire blame for World War I, which was, not entirely their fault, but that's a long story for another time. But anyways, the good thing about Great Depressions is that they make great movies. So we got Nosferatu, and this one's often lumped in with Metropolis and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Both of those movies have like crazy, weird, insane set design and stuff like that. But Nosferatu kind of takes a more grounded approach. There's a lot of real sets shot on location. They filmed in like Eastern Europe and Germany and various old-ass looking castles. And major props to Max Schreck, the guy who plays Nosferatu, the vampire, Count Orlok. Oh yeah, and the whole other thing about this movie, which I almost forgot to mention, is that it is a adaptation of Dracula. They were trying to originally just get the rights to the book and do a straightforward adaptation. However, they were unable to get the rights, so they went with the 50 Shades of Grey approach to just change the names of the characters slightly and hope that nobody notices. So Dracula became Count Orlok, the movie set in Germany versus England. There's a few differences here and there, but the main structure of the story is pretty much the same. And of course, the Bram Stoker estate absolutely did notice, and they tried to sue the movie. I think a bunch of the copies of it were lost at one point. The original music was lost for a while, and then I think eventually they were able to re-record it, but it took a while, and it was very difficult to find a copy of the movie with the original score. A whole bunch of drama and legal issues with this one. But all of that stuff, I think, just makes it more fascinating. And Max Schreck is genuinely compelling as Nosferatu. He's got a very weird look to him, and that was, theoretically part of why they cast him. Although if you see him outside of the makeup for this movie, he just mostly looks like a normal guy. But he was like very tall and kind of lanky, so his like physicality to that he brought to this definitely like makes Count Orlok look fucking weird and creepy. Iconic imagery, him being the shadow, creeping up the stairs, all that shit, him rising out of the grave. A lot of that classic horror imagery comes straight from this movie. And although being a silent movie from the 20s, it's so fucking iconic that I kind of dig it. I kind of like it. I think I'm gonna go A with this one. Bela Lugosi Dracula from 1933, I want to say 1931, earlier than that. Yeah, this one's a classic as well in its own right. They did get the rights this time for Dracula, so that helps. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's got that very old time, like it's a very like of its time impressive kind of movie. I think Bela Lugosi is excellent as Dracula. He's extremely compelling and charismatic. You just like watching him on screen. It slows down a little bit for me with a lot of the other stuff when we get into like the main story of Dracula, and it's mostly people talking in rooms about like, oh, is it really a vampire? It's like, guys, yes it is. Hurry this along. But it is much shorter than the book, so that's a plus as well. I think a lot of the sets are really awesome. It's got some good spooky atmosphere, but it is like very of its time. Do I want to say B for, is that, I don't know. I feel like I like it about as much as the original Nosferatu, but I find that one more interesting. So maybe I'm going to put this one in B. Is that controversial? I don't know. Probably. I might be the wrong guy for this list. Next up, we're talking horror of Dracula. This one is the 50s. Hammer Films had a series of Dracula and other horror movies. There was a bunch of Frankenstein movies. This is starring Christopher Lee as Dracula and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. Fucking excellent cast. Both of them are really great in it. Not as much Christopher Lee as I would prefer, but that's all right. When he is in it, he's really fun. This one is one that, again, I think I wanted to like a lot more than I did. It strays from the book a little bit and adds a couple more bodies to the body count, which is, kind of fun. They're allowed to show actual more blood in this one, so that's kind of exciting. It's in color for the first time, so we get to have like lots of red blood. One thing that I found kind of weird about this movie is that all of the scenes are like so well lit, almost in a like sitcom-y kind of way. Where are the like shadows? There should be more shadows going on. This is Dracula's a creature of the night. Put some fucking shadows on these sets. Some of the sets are kind of cool looking, but they don't really scream like gothic Dracula castle to me. So I don't know. I'm mixed on this one. I guess, I don't know. I'll put it in B, I guess, for now. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in a Dracula movie, that sounds so good. And I just was like, not as excited by it as I really wanted to be. Okay, we got Nosferatu the Vampire. This is a remake of Nosferatu in the 70s by Werner Herzog, who normally directed like documentaries, but in this one he directed a not a documentary. This one's kind of interesting. There's some cool stuff in it. Like there's a lot of really, really beautiful scenery, cinematography. I don't know what you call that. Landscape cinematography, I guess, of like Eastern Europe and the mountains and stuff. Werner Herzog is great. I love whenever he shows up in stuff, even though he just kind of plays himself. But he's also a director. Kind of a weird guy, but interesting. This one's pretty similar to the original Nosferatu. I think the original works a little better because the like grainy black and white makes the vampire look more scary and creepy and weird because you're not sure if that's a real guy or not. But in this one, it's like you can see everything a little more clearly. So it's like very obviously just a guy in vampire makeup, which is fine, but not quite as good as the original. This one also, I think at least at the time, had set like a record for the most amount of rats in a movie. They had like hundreds and hundreds of rats that like come out of the ship when Nosferatu makes his way to Germany, and it's gross. So that's kind of cool. So many rats. If you love rats, check this one out, I guess. I think I'm gonna go C on this one because it's fine, but I don't think I'd ever rewatch it again. Whereas like these, I'd be open to rewatching again at some point. Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s. This is a really, really interesting one, and one of the first Dracula movies that I saw. So I really, really wanted to like this one, and I haven't seen it for a while. So I might need to rewatch it and give it another shot. I think it is visually very, very cool, and it does a lot of really interesting stuff where they were trying to go in the opposite direction of every other filmmaker that was like starting to embrace CGI at this point in the 90s. But Coppola was like, no, fuck that, all practical, all in-camera effects. So it does a lot of like really interesting things with like puppets and shadow puppets and miniatures, old school composite photography. Very, very interesting. Gary Oldman as Dracula is pretty good, although he does have a really stupid looking haircut at the start of this movie, and that kind of gets rid of a lot of the danger. Some of the other cast works, some of it doesn't. Keanu Reeves is in this one, and he sure is trying his very best to do a British accent, and he just can't do it. He just can't do it, and it's not his fault. They miscast him. He's doing his damnedest, and he's just wrong for this role, and that's unfortunate because it is very distracting. This one also does the thing where it's called Bram Stoker's Dracula, so it's like, oh, so we're trying to be like more faithful to the book? Yes, but also we're going to add a bunch of stuff that is absolutely not in the book at all. So we get like Dracula's origin in this. There's this whole thing about he's trying to find a like resurrected love of his life, which happens to look like Mina Harker, the main character girl, who's Winona Ryder in this one. So there's a lot of stuff about him being in love with her, which is like not really in the book at all. Like he's definitely trying to drink her blood in the original book and the original story, but like him being in love is like less of a thing. And then it also goes kind of both ways in this version where like, oh, maybe she thinks that Gary Oldman is kind of hot. And it's like, I don't know, kind of goofy. I don't know. Didn't really work for me. I still think it's really, really interesting and has a lot of very cool imagery. And I should give it another rewatch because it has been a while. For the imagery, the performance by Gary Oldman, weird and interesting techniques that went into this one. I think I want to give it an A. I think I find it the most interesting of any of these, and that might be how I'm ranking these, is what I think is the most interesting, and not necessarily like what is the best Dracula or the best adaptation. So, yell at me in the comments if you want. Dracula Dead and Loving It. This is a Mel Brooks movie starring Leslie Nielsen as Dracula, which sounds like it should be a 10 out of 10, easy slam dunk. It's not that good. Unfortunately, this is one of Mel Brooks' lesser good movies, and it's just kind of not that funny. I'm not sure what specifically went wrong about it. There's like some kind of fun scenes. Like I like the part when Van Helsing, they have to stake the vampire, and there's just like so much blood, just an avalanche of blood, and that scene's pretty great. But after that, I don't really remember much of it. Maybe I should have given it a rewatch before this. I don't know. Which is disappointing because I love a lot of Mel Brooks' other movies. I think he might be one of my favorite directors, or at least he's one of the directors that's helped to influence my like sense of humor the most. So I was disappointed to not like this one as much as I feel like it could have, as much as with the amount of potential that it could have had. And I think I gotta put a D, which was kind of sad, but true. Okay, Shadow of the Vampire. This is a really interesting movie. So it's a fictional retelling of the making of Nosferatu. John Malkovich plays director F.W. Murnau, and Willem Dafoe plays Max Schreck, the actor Count Orlok in the original 1920s Nosferatu. And during the movie, it's like, oh yeah, this guy Max Schreck, he might seem kind of weird, but he's just like really method. He's really into his character, so he's going to be in costume all the time. He's just going to be this weird vampire guy on set, and we're just going to roll with it because he's going to give such an authentic performance that it's going to make the movie like incredible or whatever. And then, weird things start happening on set, and of course eventually turns out that Willem Dafoe is actually a real life vampire. This one is like a wild fucking premise for a movie, because it's like hey, remember this real actor who existed and was in other movies and stuff? We're going to make this insane claim that he was an actual real-life vampire, which is obviously not true. But, and, like, obviously the movie's not trying to say that it is really true. Like, it's a fictional movie. We know that vampires aren't real, or at least we hope that they're not real. Or maybe we hope that they are real? So, I'm of two minds about it, because I think it is doing some interesting stuff. It's this sort of interesting metaphor for, like, toxic actors and toxic directors, because John Malkovich is fully aware that Willem Dafoe is a vampire, and he's perfectly willing to cast him in his movie because he believes in his art, in the potential of this art so much that he's willing to sacrifice several members of the crew that go missing during the filming of the movie. And in the spirit of casting Max Schreck, a kind of weird-looking guy, to play a vampire, we have the perfect casting of Willem Dafoe, a goblin man, as a vampire in this role. And some of the scenes of him, like, getting drunk on set and, like, ranting about his views on the book Dracula, like, make the movie worth it, in my opinion. However, I think it also kind of takes away from some of the, like, artistry of the original movie, because it's not just like, oh, this guy looks kind of weird, so we made him a vampire. It's like, no, they're, like, using makeup and prosthetics and stuff to make him look like a vampire. So it kind of takes away from, one, the actual actors for performance, because it's like, no, he wasn't a vampire. He was just, like, kind of a tall, lanky guy, and he did a really good job acting and moving weird in the same way that we might praise, like, Doug Jones, for example, who plays every monster in every Guillermo del Toro movie. Max Schreck was, like, one of the originals of that kind of role. His movements are so weird and unnatural that it, like, is unsettling. And that's, you know, the direction and the performance of the actor, as well as accompanied by great lighting, great cinematography, and great makeup effects. If you just say that, like, oh no, that guy was just actually a vampire, it kind of takes away from all of those elements that make the film good originally. And I know this isn't, like, an actual claim of the movie. I just feel like it kind of, like, the movie I think is supposed to be more metaphorical, but it is still, like, I feel like kind of taking away from a lot of the filmmaking that goes into making one of the most iconic horror movie visuals of all time, and just kind of, it, like, minimizes the efforts of all the people that worked on the movie. It's like, no, it's just a weird vampire guy. I don't know. The other thing that's weird about the way that this movie wraps up is that it takes an idea that is from the original and kind of changes it. So in the original movie, the concept is, and maybe it's not even super well executed, that's up to you, but the concept is that the Mina equivalent character, I forget her name, but the main girl protagonist is depicted as being the only one strong enough to be able to hold Count Orlok and survive his bite, his sucking of blood long enough to hold him in place so that when the sun comes up in the morning, it goes through the window and kills him. The original Nosferatu was also one of the first depictions of sunlight being deadly to vampires, which is such a cool thing that came from this movie and feels like it always existed in vampire mythology. And maybe it did to some extent, but it wasn't in the book Dracula. He does, like, sleep during the day and mostly only goes out at night, but I think he even goes out during the day briefly at one point, and they never mentioned that, like, sunlight would kill him, just that he is a creature of darkness and prefers the night. And it could be that idea is in other vampire mythology, I'm not sure, but at least in the Dracula story, sunlight being, like, the killing thing for being a deadly force for Dracula is straight from Nosferatu. So the concept in the original movie is that the leading lady, the final girl, is the only one strong enough to hold this evil entity long enough for him to get killed by the sun. It's actually like a feminist concept that women have a stronger, like, a willpower or tolerance to pain or whatever it is, something that men wouldn't be able to accomplish. Even though she's, like, submitting to this vampire guy. It's actually a proactive choice from the character and a willing sacrifice in order to save everyone. If a man tried to do the same thing, he would be unsuccessful. That's the concept in the original movie. Whether or not it's like successful at depicting that concept, or if that concept even works for you, that's for you to judge. But that's the idea they're going for. In Shadow of the Vampire, once the other crew members are like, okay, this guy's a vampire and we need to do something about it because otherwise he's going to kill all of us, they come up with a plan to complete the film and defeat Willem Dafoe, which is to film the final scene where he tries to eat the girl's blood, and then keep shooting long enough, and hopefully she's going to hold him there long enough that he sucks up all the blood and then gets killed by the sun, and we'll just film him getting killed by the sun. I think they drug the girl even. They do establish earlier that she's like a drug addict or something, but anyways. So it takes this idea that's like actually kind of a feminist concept, and it flips it on its head and saying, no, it was actually the men's idea to trap Dracula by sacrificing their female co-worker, which is super fucked up. Also, we're still going to complete the movie and we're willing to maybe sacrifice the actress in order to kill the vampire and also to finish our movie, because finishing the movie is still a priority. Now, I don't think F.W. Monroe in this movie, or Murnau in this movie, is like supposed to be a heroic character. I do still think it is like kind of fucked up that they take this concept from the original. Like, I do think it's kind of, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about how they're taking this concept that's almost kind of a feminist thing and then like make it like, no, it was the man's idea actually. So yeah, I don't know. I find this movie really interesting. I think Willem Dafoe is great, but I find it also kind of problematic and kind of weird. I don't know. It's such a wild concept when you like think about it that I don't know what to do with it, but I find it really interesting, so I'm going to put it a day. Batman versus Dracula. This is an obvious S tier. This is kind of the thing that I want from a Dracula movie. And I know that's not really at all what the book is like, because there's no Batman. But okay, here's I've talked about this movie before. I genuinely think it's excellent and one of the best animated Batman movies. But all kidding aside here, I think there is something really, really interesting about the Batman-Dracula relationship. Dracula goes through the original story as this like undead, immortal, all-powerful evil entity. And he keeps getting thwarted by these like regular ass dudes, these regular boring ass white milquetoast regular people. You got Van Helsing, and Van Helsing is like knows a little bit more about what's going on and what to do against vampires and all of that stuff. Some versions he's a little bit more actively hunting vampires, and some versions he has like an implied past with the supernatural and the undead and stuff like that. But even when he joins the team, it still takes them like a while to get to Dracula. Meanwhile, Dracula is just slowly killing one girl and then almost killing a second. And it takes him forever to do anything. And he's this like immortal, all-powerful, evil thing, but he can barely kill 2 women. It's like, geez, this guy is weak as fuck. In Batman versus Dracula, Dracula is legitimately scary. Now, technically, he doesn't really end up killing anyone in this movie because it's like for kids or whatever, even though like it's the most bloody and violent of any of these movies, at least the ones we've talked about so far. But he does infect hundreds of the citizens of Gotham and is slowly taking it over. He's genuinely powerful and scary and easily one of the strongest villains that Batman's ever faced. But on the reverse side of that, Batman ends up being a really, really compelling antagonist for Dracula, because Dracula, like, at first almost assumes that Batman is trying to be a vampire or being like this pseudo, taking the image of Dracula and co-opting it. But Batman is just coincidentally has bats as a motif. And he's never really given Dracula a second thought until he comes face to face with him. At the end of the movie, when Batman finally defeats him, Dracula can't believe that Batman is just a regular guy. He's like, how is it possible? How is it possible that a regular ass guy was able to defeat me? It doesn't make sense. I'm a demon. I'm evil incarnate, but he's not the Batman. And that's such a fucking cool concept. Literary figures from two completely different eras, but somehow, like peanut and butter and jelly, they fit perfectly together. It's two great tastes that taste great together. 10 out of 10. Perfect film. Dracula Untold. I kind of like this one, even though it's bad. It's the perfect kind of bad movie for me, where it's like really stupid, and it has a lot of dumb, goofy action, and it's not really at all related to like the original source material. So this one was supposed to, one of the many attempts to like kick off the Universal Dark Universe or whatever, their cinematic monster movie universe, which existed in the 30s, and then since Marvel they've been trying to kind of do it, but have had zero success. So I always find those attempts really funny, because this one has like a really funny sequel bait scene in the post credits. But it takes the concept that like, although Dracula was inspired by Vlad the Impaler, like there's not really anything in the book that really suggests that he's supposed to be the actual guy, Vlad the Impaler. But this movie is like, what if he was? I guess they do that in Bram Stoker's Dracula as well. Anyways, so this one's about like, what if he was? How did he become Dracula? And what if also he was a little bit sympathetic? So like, it's really goofy. It doesn't really make any sense. He's got a bunch of bat powers where he can turn into bats or whatever. And it's stupid and goofy in all the best ways. B tier. Renfield. This one was a movie came out a couple of years ago, starring Nicholas Hoult as Renfield and Nicolas Cage as Dracula. It's a comedy. It's got some kind of fun action. I feel like the editing and stuff was not as strong as it should have been. The story itself was also like a little bit clunky. The main stuff with Renfield and Dracula I thought was pretty fun. Nicolas Cage is obviously very fun as Dracula. There's some cool prosthetic effects. I talked about this movie in a horror movie compilation review I did for the month of October, so go check that out if you want. But ultimately, probably B. I don't know. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. I think we're gonna go B. The Last Voyage of the Demeter. So this is a movie that came out last year or 2 years ago, something like that. And I really, really wanted to like it because I thought the premise was super cool. So there's a part in Dracula where he goes on this ship, and it goes from Transylvania or wherever to London. There's like a whole thing about he has to transport the same earth that he was buried in or whatever. But anyways, he's on this ship, and when the ship's going from New York to California, it's got to get Dracula gets a little snacky, and so he starts eating the crew members of the ship one by one. And so it's Alien, but on a pirate ship in the 1800s. Great fucking premise for a book or for a movie. However, I think, although there's some really great like atmosphere to this one, and I also really like the Dracula design. He's just kind of like a monster bat creature. Like, he doesn't really look at all human. There's some CGI stuff to it, but whenever they're using like a practical prosthetic creature stuff, makeup effects, it looks awesome. I like some of the atmosphere of this one, but I think there's a couple major problems. One, the main tension of this whole chapter kind of does... this part of the story of Dracula doesn't quite work on its own, because you kind of know that everyone on the ship is a goner. So you really have to give me a reason to care about the characters in order to like feel bad for them when they inevitably all get eaten. And this movie attempts to do that with some of the characters. I just think it's not quite there. I really like the premise of it. It's just not quite, it just didn't quite hit the way I was hoping it would. The other problem is the whole point of that chapter and the tension in it is that like, oh no, Dracula's coming on his way to London. I sure hope he doesn't get there, because then the characters that I actually care about, the main ones in the book Dracula, will be in danger. So all these like red shirts on the ship are like they're goners. We know they're goners right away. So it's kind of hard to care about them, and it's kind of hard because like structurally it's not really meant to be a whole story, you know? So I like the premise. I like a lot of the concepts of it, but I think I'm going to go B as well because I think the execution just doesn't quite work. And finally, we get to Nosferatu 2024, Robert Eggers' new movie. I loved this one. I thought it was excellent. All of these Dracula movies, all of these things were not quite what I was looking for in a Dracula story. Outside of Batman vs. Dracula, which does something very different, this is the one. This is the S tier for me. This is what I've been looking for. It takes all of the best stuff from the original Nosferatu, the dark imagery, the shadows. So many cool fucking stuff with shadows in this movie where like Count Orlok sort of becomes Shadow. Great stuff. We got fucking Willem Dafoe is back. He's playing the like Van Helsing equivalent, and he's awesome. He's a little bit weird and a little bit crazy. Love him. Always excellent to see. And it's fun that he was a weird vampire man in a previous movie, and now he's back as a weird Van Helsing man. Love it. We got Nicholas Hoult. He's back. Interesting here because he's playing a very different, it's a more serious character. It's not like a comedy role, although he does still have a couple moments that feel a little bit comedic. Interestingly, so in Renfield, they're taking stuff from the original Dracula, and there's like a couple scenes that recreate moments from the original Universal Dracula with Bela Lugosi, which basically does the opening chapters with Jonathan Harker. It takes those and changes it so that Renfield's the like guy who goes to Dracula's castle initially. So in both Renfield and Nosferatu, we get a scene of Nicholas Hoult going to like Dracula's castle to get him to sign the papers or whatever. I don't know. I just think that's kind of fun. But yeah, Robert Eggers obviously did a bunch of really great horror stuff. The Witch, the Lighthouse, The Northman, which is not exactly horror, but also really cool, and I like it a lot. This one is like perfect type of movie for him. I think he started as a production designer, so all of his movies have like really, really authentic looks to them. Cinematography, absolutely beautiful. The lighting is so nice looking. So much great stuff with shadows. The colors are incredible. They do a lot of stuff with, which I really, really liked, where the nighttime scenes almost look like black and white because everything's so dark. Definitely got to see this one either in theaters or like at nighttime in your house with all the lights turned off to get like the full effect. Incredible Count Orlok, not like anything else really. He's played by Bill Skarsgård, Pennywise himself, who's maybe a modern day horror icon. Is that safe to say? But he completely disappears into this role, and a lot of that is due to like the weird makeup and stuff. But oh man, I fucking love the design of this Dracula. He's so different looking than any other version. He's a little bit based on like Vlad the Impaler, where he's got like the cloak and the mustache, but it's like a gross, like almost pedophile mustache. And then he's like this, because he's this undead creature of the night, he's this like rotting, decaying corpse that's walking around. And it's so fucking disgusting. It's incredible. They do the sequence in the last voyage. They do the last voyage of the Demeter sequence in like a couple scenes that are kind of way better than anything in that movie. Like there's this incredible shot that feels like it's lifted straight from Aliens, where Count Orlok is like hiding amongst all these ropes in the bowels of the ship, and because his like flesh is so gross and decaying, his arms and the muscles look like gross ship ropes, and then he like moves a little bit and it's like ugh. It looks like a scene straight out of Alien. It's amazing, incredible stuff. Yeah, the music was great. Performances are all really good. They also do a few things that restructure the story slightly to increase maximum tension. They take the concept that was like a little bit in the original Nosferatu, and then I think it was taken even a little bit further in the 70s version, but there's this idea that not only is Mina Harker, the Mina Harker equivalent, the main final girl character, like the strongest one and the only one who's able to sacrifice herself long enough to defeat Dracula, but she actually has some kind of psychic connection with him. This is like a little bit in the book, but only after she gets bitten by Dracula does she have sort of kind of a psychic link to him, and she can even kind of tell what he's up to, which ends up helping them defeat him in the book. But here they take that concept even further, and it's like, one, they do a lot of really interesting stuff with like mental illness, where she's got some kind of, she suffers from like seizures and weird things like that, but she also has this like psychic link to Orlok. And so she has this like weird, creepy connection to him. So when he first makes it to Germany, he's like, I want you to submit to me. And she's like, no, I'm not doing that. And he's like, then I'm going to kill somebody you love every day until you don't. So suddenly these other characters dying are not just because, you know, Dracula's in town and killing people. It's directly affected by the actions of our main protagonist. She theoretically could stop them by sacrificing herself, or maybe Dracula's just a dick and he'll kill them anyways, but it puts so much more tension on both the timeline of like, one, it's only a few days instead of like what seems like weeks or months in the book. It's a while. It takes place over, I think it's over months in the book. But anyways, it makes the tension super high, people die, and it feels like the main characters are kind of at fault, which puts so much more like tension on everything that's happening. And again, they double down on this like this almost old proto-feminist concept that women are actually much stronger than men and can withstand pain and suffering more than they can. And yeah, Dracula's just this evil demon creature, and he's fucking scary as hell. And there's a lot of very like weird pseudo-sexual violence in this, and does it get weird and creepy and culty? Absolutely. If you ever forget that you're watching a Robert Eggers movie, don't worry, he reminds you. But this movie was absolutely worked for me. My favorite Dracula like retelling outside of Batman of course outside of Batman versus Dracula, which is not really a retelling of the book. That's my review. I loved it. It was great. Check it out. That's this video. I've been recording for a full hour. Good job, me. I think that's it. Please yell about my terrible taste in Dracula movies in the comments. What was your favorite Dracula movies, and which ones should I watch that I haven't already? Please let me know. And I'll see you next time with something else. Bye-bye.